Today on this episode of The Brain Surgeon's Take, we will be discussing how artificial intelligence is changing medicine with Professor of Computational Precision Health at UC Berkeley and UCSF, Dr. Adam Yala. Learn how AI is rapidly evolving, pushing the frontiers of healthcare and impacting patient experience on every level. Much more on this podcast episode. Welcome back, everyone. Here's my take on Adam Yala. He is on the cutting edge of artificial intelligence and an early adapter into the medical space. As a professor of computational precision health at UC Berkeley and UCSF, Adam has the unique access to the latest developments in technology and is able to integrate them into a progressive healthcare system. AI is clearly changing the world. We all see that, and medicine is no exception. During the podcast, I discussed with Adam how AI will be able to, number one, predict future cancer risk, as well as design personalized screening policies, enhance private data sharing, and much more. As a doctor, this interview really caught my attention. As I was speaking to Adam, I realized my own job would be rapidly changing moving forward. The way we practice medicine will be completely different in just 5 or 10 years, and we all need to adapt or become quickly irrelevant. New technology is here to stay. The question is, how do we harness its power without opening up Pandora's box and playing God? This is a dilemma for everyone, including myself. The advent of AI has ushered in a new world, which is both exciting and terrifying. Listen up as we discuss how artificial intelligence is changing medicine. Check it out. Hey, Adam, how you doing?
Hey, doing good. Thanks for having me.
Listen, I'm very excited to talk to you today about artificial intelligence and how it's affecting medicine. Obviously being a doctor, I know what's going on in the field, and it's very exciting. And to talk to someone like yourself that's on the cutting edge should be very revealing. So again, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks again for having me.
Let's start with the basics. People use the term AI all the time, but what exactly is AI and how is it generally being used in modern day healthcare?
Yeah, so AI has been a term that's been like expanded to mean more and more things ever since it first started being used many decades ago. Broadly, when we think of AI today, we tend to think of machine learning, which is the technology and the science of algorithms that learn. So instead of like hard coding the behavior that we want, instead of saying, okay, if you see a tumor of this size, then do this, you give it something much more flexible, like a desired behavior, like recognize a tumor at all, or find does it respond or not, and it finds its own way to solve the problem. So it's a much more flexible form of computation that's designed to learn from patterns in the data. That could be designed to do decision making, designed to recognize particular objects. Like there's a broad class of things that fit within this picture. That's normally what we mean when we say AI. Now, its impact in healthcare is kind of, there's two styles of impacts. Like I'll kind of like by part partition in my mind. One of them is like, how do you make things like more automated, more efficient, more accessible? How do you like make parts of the delivery process easier, because there's just a lot of pain in the world of nonsense that we wouldn't rather deal with. You see this also true in most of the industry as a whole. Like if you code, you might have like a GitHub Copilot, where like it helps you write code you're already going to write. It doesn't like change the code you could have ever written. It just makes you more efficient at it, and it gives you some things to kind of help you in that workflow. Google search is a form of that. Or like you could have read in library, I guess. It just seems like a giant pain compared to using tools to help you retrieve that information. But it isn't like do something that's fundamentally impossible for you. That's kind of one bucket. The other bucket, which is really where most of my work lies, where I'm most excited, is using it to discover things that we can't do. So like one context I work in a lot is like how do you catch cancer earlier than otherwise possible? Like that requires a sense of foresight who's going to get cancer. We can't just look at something by eye and say this person's going to get cancer. Like reality creates that label. It's not like that we label it ourselves because we know it's going to happen. And then we use AI to do things we can't do at all. And I think there's more and more of kind of this like AI for science intersection where we're using more sophisticated tools to expand the realm of what is possible for our technology to do. And those are kind of the two buckets, like basically efficiency and then discovery.
Now, another term that's used commonly when we discuss AI in medicine is personalized medicine. Discuss how AI will improve personalized medicine.
Yeah. So I'm going to give this in a kind of a cancer context where a lot of my world lives. And I really think that like almost every problem we deal with within like how do you screen, how do you do a diagnostic workflow, how do you treatment planning, is a question of personalization. Like you look at their current screening program, let's say in breast cancer, right? Like we tell everybody do the exact same thing, come back every year or every 2 years, depending on the organization that you listen to. And the issue is that for some people, that's like way too much. Right? Like they're gonna have like way a lot of like unnecessary anxiety and harm and biopsy through that process and never get anything. For some people, it's too little. Let's look at late diagnosis. They should have had something more sensitive. The answer there is trivial, right? Like it's if you only you knew, you would have given the right person the exact best intervention to make sure they got the best possible outcome for the minimum harm. Treatment planning is the same thing, right? If only you knew, you would never have a wrong first course of therapy, right? You'd only get the first one the very right time. You would know in advance. There would be no uncertainty. Care would be very straightforward. Now we've always thought like this is a decision process. So you only have tools to quantify notions of like risk and benefit. The thing is, it tends to be not very accurate. So look at like our best in class clinical risk models we use for breast cancer. Like they look at age, family history, all this kind of stuff combined. All of that together like is in a type of AI, right? It's a classifier. It takes in the inputs these demographics. It outputs like who gets an MRI. If you evaluate it as a classifier, you see that 95% who get an MRI will not have anything, so it's a giant waste, and like less than a quarter of all cancers will ever be eligible for the MRI. So like in that space, if you take more than the demographics, if you take everything, what more in the data can be discovered to make the classifier better? And so in this kind of setting where we just want to say, well, who do we give the right intervention to? You can view our entire intervention process as like a model that has a particular accuracy. Like clinical care today is an algorithm, right? And it has performance. Can you make the performance better? And AI methods are the best tools we have to actually do that. And so like
Now, I guess,
yeah,
so the next question is, you're talking about integrating personalized prediction.
yeah,
How does AI integrate with current healthcare? Meaning, like, you've got personnel, you've got people like myself
yeah.
who are human beings doing healthcare. And I think a lot of the concern is that, will AI replace physicians, in your opinion? I mean, it seems like that's inevitable.
Yeah, I really don't. I would say that it will make the profession different. So, like, if you take the example of like how software engineering worked in the '90s to the 2000s to now, it's changing substantially every decade. We still have software engineers that simply operate on a higher level of abstraction to get more done. So, like, will a radiologist always like radiology, for example, like in cancer screening, you tend to have like a hierarchical workflow, right? Like you have screening memos, and you have diagnostics, and you have biopsies. Will everybody need the same level of review? Do people have to read 300 exams a day forever? Maybe not. Uh, Maybe if you don't have to do quite as much of that, it opens up doors for being able to do more things that are otherwise too cost ineffective to do in the first place. So I think like medicine as a profession is I don't imagine that in any way fundamentally disappearing. But it should be reimagined, because if we don't reimagine it, we don't actually change that workflow and give people more ability to get more done, then we're not growing enough.
So, fields that will be the most impacted, just from my point of view, and you can
Yeah,
say whether or not this is accurate, but pathology, radiology, fields where it's pattern recognition, right? Pathology, radiology, you learn by looking at thousands of slides and you recognize that this chest x-ray shows cardiomegaly, or it shows a lung cancer. Or pathology, you look at a slide, this this slide shows atypia, it's a, aggressive malignant tumor. The computer is going to be way better at recognizing patterns. So, what other fields do you see affected besides radiology and pathology the most by AI?
I think that it should really be in almost any and every discipline. It should, as the field matures more, uh, surgery should be able to benefit from AI. If you could get like real time margin status, like if you knew more, maybe that would even change the way you think about operating. If the tools were so good, I think there's things where it's harder, where the technology isn't mature enough yet for us to imagine, here's the right way it can be helpful for me. But there's many kind of open ended domains. Let's say you're in primary care, someone can come in with literally anything. You have lots of uncertainty. What's the right AI assisted workflow to help make that job easier and better? It's not that it's impossible. It should be there, just an open challenge to make that truly true. It's not clear if the concurrent LLM, like MedPalm kind of stuff, will get there and actually be useful for that. But I think that there is, in any field where we're basically saying we have multiple interventions, how do we do it? We don't know what's going to be the perfect benefit or harm for this person. All of our clinical trials have to be average effect across a population. You're not treating the average population, you're treating an individual person. How do you transfer knowledge to this? How does that help you operate better, regardless of what the task is? that's an information problem. And if our AI tools aren't helping yet, we're not doing good enough, and we need to make them better to do that. So I don't think it's going to be like the place where it's most obvious is exactly where you said, right? Like places that are like where you already have a consulting style role. You say, help me interpret this, can I understand what's going on. But I think that's just one class of decision, and we should be able to help across the spectrum.
This episode of the Brain Surgeon's Take is brought to you by vitamin water. Vitamin water is the ideal way to hydrate, replete your electrolytes, and maintain wellness. I drink vitamin water routinely during the day in order to keep up my energy and focus. Check out vitaminwater.com for more information and use the promo code BrainSurgeonsTake for 20% off your first order. Now, we've gone over the benefits and we'll go into them some more, but I also want to talk about risks because anytime you're bringing in new technology, there's always risks involved.
For sure.
What do you think are the biggest risks of incorporating AI into healthcare?
I mean, I think it like any other intervention, right? Like because it's a decision process tool. Uh, so if it's not rigorously evaluated, not treated as a fundamental change in how you're delivering care, and it's not like gone through trials where people consented to have this tried to them and then gone through, then you have massive risk, right? Like what is the risk of a drug? Well, in general, you want to have drugs, right? Like they're great, uh, but we wouldn't do them without trials, right? We wouldn't do them without like solid retrospective evidence or like evidence across different populations to make sure that there's nothing like breaking down. And I think the same kind of principles apply. I think in our current system, we actually live in a pretty low AI adoption world, especially in medicine. So to me, the biggest risk is that actually like 10 years from now, even if AI is doing things that are phenomenally good, we still have no level of integration. And it still looks like that the technology of today and the kind of like the way that the EMR works, the amount of physician burnout today is exactly the same as it is 10 years from now. To me, that's like the most likely worst case scenario. Uh, we already have a system that's like very much like you have to prove efficacy before deploying things. I think that's the right culture. But I think like it's going to require like big pushes to build that evidence. If we go without evidence, massive risks, right? Like we can't do that. We need to have evidence that things actually work. But I think we're in general in medicine, at least my perception so far is that we're generally more easily let go of change and not adopt technology when it could be helpful than the other way around.
I would say 1000% accurate. What you just said kind of reminds me of like, let's say the IRB and research
Yeah.
opportunities. It's there to block unsafe research and it's there to make sure that people do things correctly, but it's so stifling and so suffocating that research projects take years and potentially even decades to come into fruition. Same thing, I think, with AI. We need to make sure it's done safely, but you don't want to stifle it such that you're halting progress. So I think that's a great point that you bring up. You also bring up the EMR, and I wanted to ask you, how does AI ensure data privacy of health data?
Yeah, so in a way, it's a little bit orthogonal. I think it causes new kinds of risks, right? Because let's imagine you have a generative model, like a big LLM thing that's trained on the EMR to help with various amounts of tasks. If you release this into the wild, and let's say anyone can use it, it's almost guaranteed that someone will be able to extract training data from that LLM and leak privacy. This has always been a risk. If your tool is based on some confidential private data, then it's fundamentally linked. So maybe a sophisticated enough attacker could recover the data from that tool. And the more sophisticated the tool, the more parameters it has, the easier this is to do. So a purely open setting in which like you have like large LLMs trained on identifiable data, and then that's released into the wild is like would not be secure. And people like you will see papers that will basically start extracting training data out. It's something that's easily doable, and it's really hard to. The only way we know to prevent that is something called differential privacy, where basically we change the training algorithm to make it not depend too much on any individual sample. But you could imagine there's a pretty strong privacy utility trade-off there, right? If you can't look at the training data too much, what can you really learn,
Of
right? Like, and the
course.
higher dimensional the thing, the more problematic this becomes. And so, similar to how we have kind of a closed system in the sense of just not everybody can just look at Epic. Like, they just can't. Like, you have to have a reason to look at it. I think that puts similar scope of use restrictions and how what some AIs can do. Because if you have them, you have just like black box access to them. You can get a lot out of them. They kind of summarize the world that they saw,
Hmm. Yeah, I
and I
think
think it's going to
that's
cause new challenges in deployment.
I mean, challenges, just like you were saying, you're afraid that potentially it won't be integrated fast enough because of the concerns. And I think HIPAA and security and privacy is such a major priority in medicine, which
Yeah.
it should be, but sometimes people take it to the extremes that it might prevent full integration. People are going to bring up, oh, these AI models, they breach privacy, they breach, HIPAA, and then that is potentially going to halt or at least slow down the integration of AI. What about biases? Are there any biases in these
So
AI software models, and are there
yeah.
limitations?
So I just want to add a quick thing on the privacy front. I think like it's important to have the right threat model. Let's imagine you're building an AI tool that's deployed in a hospital. Do we enforce that Epic can't show you identifiable information? No, that would be against the point. Do we enforce that if a referring physician can't show identifiable information? No, that would be against the point. How do you know which patient you're even supposed to treat? And so I think it's important to treat AI in the same way. If we can integrate into a care workflow, it needs to be able to deal with identifiable information to help that workflow. Now, you're not going to send that to a random other organization or other random group that has no reason to see that chain of care. And I think it's the same kind of thing where, like, just because the thing captures private training data does not mean that valid use should be impossible. We like not me personally because I'm not a physician, but like as a community in the medical system, we look at identifiable data all the time to deliver good, right?
Yeah.
So there's no reason why I shouldn't either.
Yeah,
It'd be
it's
like
it's
strange
it's a
expectation.
slippery slope. I feel like every time the privacy thing comes up, I understand why privacy is so important. However, at the same time, we are trying to take care of patients that you need to identify who they are, and people take it to the extreme, and then it starts stifling progress. So hopefully that
Yeah.
doesn't occur with AI. But what about limitations and biases to AI?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things that are still really open challenges. So let's take for example tools that look at the EMR as a whole to base their predictions. So to give a motivating example of like why I care about this kind of thing, uh, there's many cancers, 'cause I work primarily in cancer, where we really can't do screening. Like it's not cost effective enough. We have no idea. Like the prevalence is so low, like pancreatic cancer, where we can't make it cost effective for people who give screening to. If only we knew, then we could maybe do something and have less things called a metastatic stage. That's an open
Hmm.
question. The best way I've thought of how we could make that possible one day is looking at the full EMR record to say, well, who might get pancreatic cancer? Right? There's a lot of information there. But even if it worked in one hospital, how do you do validity? Because every EMR is different. Every hospital, and we have all this kind of billing code pollution nonsense all across the United States. But like the EMR is a product of the workflow and the organization that's developing it, and that is fundamentally different place to place, can change over time. So how do you make sure it's even still working? So there's a lot of things on this line of like when data the thing that's generating the data is always moving. How do you do AI in that setting remains really hard, because you can't just say, well, does it work at the next hospital? Maybe it should, maybe it shouldn't. So if it doesn't work in the next hospital, is your algorithm a fluke, or is it just what's expected because you have different care process?
Yeah.
Right? Like, and when, how do you know that it's no longer working? So like the way to kind of entangle a lot of that is like a lot of comes down to, did you learn like a causal function? Did you like that? There's a lot of complication to kind of making that realizable, and so I think there is many challenges for types of modalities where it's still hard to know that things are definitely going to work, even if you see promising test set results. And it's not to say it's impossible. It's just going to require more and more innovations to make it there. And there's many other kind of settings. So let's imagine you have like a new kind of scanner, brand new, exciting technology that's images something you could never image before. How do you transfer knowledge from all the other technology you've ever had to that? Because you're not going to have like millions of things on this kind of new in this new technology. Like this interface between like new acquisition, new types of signals to the past also remains an open challenge. So there's lots to do to keep at least people like me
I
entertained.
can see why you're so busy. What about the ethics behind it? And I think anytime you're dealing with technology advancement, one of the first questions on everyone's mind is ethics and those principles behind development and deployment. How are people like yourself dealing with the ethical dilemmas behind AI?
Yeah, I think that in a way this is in a sense where like unified across technology development and healthcare. Right. This is why we have IRBs that help kind of ensure that the right kind of studies are being run. We're asking the right kind of questions. And I think oftentimes, or at least the way I feel in my own work, is there'll be a central challenge we're trying to address. For example, how do we do personalized screening uh, across a variety of cancers? How do you personalize treatment plan across a variety of cancers to minimize harm for those who are getting too much, or maximize the benefit for those who are not getting enough? Uh, to achieve that well, like that is not a question of one health system, right? Like to actually solve that question, that implies a lot of different things. And so to say like, if we're going to meaningfully pursue this question fully, to say like do this at a overall good to the overall society, this implies we're going to need to do global validations. We want to do large multi-center trials. We need to make sure that this helps very different populations, and it kind of sets a very high bar. And I think when I think about like what is the role, like how do we make sure we do this responsibly? This is like a kind of community effort. IRBs play a role to kind of wean out some unsafe behavior. Our publication system plays a role. Our kind of like a kind of public dialogue of what is expected, the things we
Hmm.
must test to make sure we don't have any sore blind spots to kind of encourage more disparities than before, all kind of play that together. And I don't think that like uh, ethics in research is kind of a individual act. It's kind of a community act. We build the norms together and then try to live up to them.
Yeah, it's like a belt and suspenders type model where you've got multiple kind of safe proof methods to ensure that all of those ethics get adhered to. And I think that's a great kind of model that you guys are putting together, and understanding that it's not one person that's responsible. Of course, it's going to take an entire community like it currently does to
Yeah.
make sure that the ethics get adhered to. So, do you think that AI will affect professional job security positively or negatively?
I think it will. It's going to be a mixed effect. I think that for people who can meaningfully, like, let's imagine within a single profession, AI has a large role to play to make people more effective and do their job even better. Then for those who are not using said tooling, it will hurt them. It will hurt their job security, and it's going to kind of change the balance of competitiveness. So I think there's going to need to be care to kind of like integrating the way new technology is developed and kind of proficiency in using them into the general like continuing education pipeline, because it's not like it's magical. It's not like it's gonna like, I don't think it's gonna eliminate whole job functions as a whole. But it should be redefining them for doing well. Right? Like we should not take our current status for as the optimum where we can't do better. So we should always be making better tools, and we would hope that the best tools are always being used. And so I think that's kind of going to be the pattern where, like, if there's places that have systemically worse adoption for structural issues, kind of cultural issues, where they simply don't want uh, to use something that's available, but others do in the same community, then that's going to create some new kind of competitive landscapes.
I think it's really well said. And I think this applies to any field in general.
Yeah,
Technology is advancing in the world in general at an
yeah,
astronomical pace. And if you're not willing to adopt new technology, you become a dinosaur overnight. And so I think, just like you said, people who are open to adopting AI and integrating it are going to have enhanced job security. And the people that view it as a threat and something new and they don't want to adopt it are just going to quickly become obsolete. Um, you were talking about cancer and how AI can help in terms of cancer prediction. What are some other chronic conditions that you feel that AI can help manage?
yeah. I think there's so within I'm going to kind of like go through a quick set of settings within like managing metabolic syndrome, like like things like diabetes. You have so much kinds of data that could be available really like continuously forever, right? Like I mean, like you have lots of kind of at-home monitoring, and how do you extract useful signals from that? I think is going to be a fascinating area. And there's new kinds of like work from like people like Dina Katabi's lab, where you have kind of these invisible sensors that essentially use Wi-Fi to learn lots of physical signals about the person. And so in this kind of setting, we have really chronic diseases where you want to learn how do I best manage the state to make sure both my long-term outcomes are okay, that things don't degrade, and kind of maximize quality of life. I think there's a really fascinating problem where we should be able to do better, and it's the very beginning of like there's additional infrastructure challenges to be able to do data sharing from that setting in a way that is follows ethical principles we want to on hold, that kind of preserves privacy, etc. But I think it's going to be an area where it's going to be really great technical progress, and there's some folks in CPH, where I'm faculty at Berkeley and UCSF, who are deeply interested in this problem, including uh, there's new projects, both going to be led partially. I think one of my colleagues, Irene Chen's interested in them, and also one of my directors, Ida Sim. So I think there's going to be a lot of great work there. Within cardiovascular care, there's both, I think, going to be really exciting work in predicting things like uh, acute sudden cardiac events, like sudden cardiac death. There's really great work by Ziad Obermeyer's lab at Berkeley looking at this kind of problem. And I think it's possible that compared to our current tooling to try to manage that and give the right people the surgical intervention, we'll be able to do much better by better understanding the actual pattern. But also more generally, if I have much better understanding of how my daily actions are impacting this kind of overall physiological risks, how much better can we make, how much better can we make that management? Like, and this is true more generally. And in places where we have a really hard time doing meaningful interventions, like Alzheimer's, if we can better understand that very long-term outcome from detailed reporting today, how does it change the way we do trials? How does it change the way we do target discovery? I think like in almost every setting, like I take the view of it's not good enough, right? It's almost always true.
Yeah,
And
that is.
if we
I
extract
mean,
more
that's
information, what's the best tool we can imagine today? Today we're calling it AI. Tomorrow we'll call it something else. But like we should continue pushing.
yeah. I think the idea that it's good enough. I always tell my colleagues that it's never good enough. When you say it's good enough, then it's not good enough. You have to always. There's always a way to improve, whether it's a treatment, a surgery, a prognosis, what have you. Let's talk about something that definitely affects me. And how do you see AI affecting surgery? How do you see it being integrated into the surgical domain?
Yeah, I would actually. I'll give my guess, but I'm gonna also flip it at the same time. So I've been told that there's opportunities for kind of like real time. This is not just AI; it'd also be like new kind of imaging technologies, but like real time margin status, ways to get new information directly as you're operating could be helpful to surgeons. But I would say that like the way that these innovations work isn't so much that like an AI person has like a idea in a vacuum. Like it really is. I believe it's going to be surgeons in collaboration with people who build these kind of tooling who will define what that looks like. And that's partially what's kind of like that competitiveness of like how the landscape is going to be changed. It's not going to be the like, some like OpenAI is going to swoop in and change surgery. Surgeons are going to change surgery. And they're going to do that by like building a coalition around them to then reimagine what surgery could be if they only had more information. And it's the same thing in radiology. It's the same thing. And like I've been lucky enough to collaborate with enough folks in cancer over the years now. I have like a better intuition uh, because we have like so many ongoing collaborations. But that's kind of how it goes. Like each field is reinventing itself with the technology of the future. So it's not like it's not outside in, it's inside out.
That's well said, and more to your point, when you're talking about integrating and collaborating, a big part of that is research, right? Research and development. How is AI augmenting current research?
I think there are some parts in which it does make okay, so I'll answer that in three parts. All right. So one part, like if you're doing cohort construction, actually even to say like what study population am I studying, that's often a giant pain. Like things are like inside free text notes, and you like don't know who's who, so you have to do a bunch of manual chart review. It limits the scale. Giant pain. Uh, that kind of stuff is like a classic LLM problem. You should be able to kind of explore the kind of thing at scale much faster, right? That's one. That's one bucket. Once you have a cohort and you want to understand something about them, there's like new kinds of tooling to say, well, if I only have like my single cell signal for 100 people, but let's say I have pathology for like tens of thousands, how do I use that pathology to boost my effective sample size of the single cell data? So like how do you kind of better combine information to squeeze more out of it, to draw like valid inferences? Also a very exciting line of work with some really great work by many people. It's like I feel like I do like a laundry list of shout out names. Uh, like prediction powered inference, really cool work by Michael Jordan's group that kind of touches down that direction. Another kind of thread altogether is, well, you have these LLMs that have read a lot of literature. How do you do hypothesis generation? How do you kind of test causal arrows? How do you have you design experiments? It's not another kind of bucket. When you're actually designing trials, how do you run trials more efficiently and kind of integrate real world data to make the trial, not to have giant RCTs every single time? Like in every part of that process, we think through cohort design, hypothesis generation, uh, the way we can test the hypotheses, both in terms of trials or if the hypothesis is something that is actually an AI driven hypothesis in itself, where like could a model learn this? There's room to grow. I think it's kind of a factorial thing. I mean, my expertise is a tiny portion of this overall picture. My work touches particularly things in cancer, but like it's a incredibly exciting time to be in the field because it's across almost basically any and every discipline. There's like a boom of new progress of how can new computational innovation make new things possible, and it's because things are in general so open, and there's so much more cross literacy than ever before. Things are moving faster and faster. So it's breathtaking. It's an inspiring time to be in the field.
Now, obviously, AI, just like any technology, costs money. It takes resources. It's not doesn't just fall
Yeah.
out of the tree and it's not free. So a lot of people think that one of the ethical dilemmas of AI is that it's going to further widen disparities in healthcare, meaning that underserved poor communities are not going to have AI and people living in Beverly Hills are going to have AI. What do you feel about how we can harness the benefits of AI to benefit everyone as opposed to just people that are in well-to-do communities?
Yeah, I think that that's definitely a risk unless we like actively work against it. I mean, something about software as a whole, right? Like the true marginal cost of additional installation is very low. So it doesn't have to be that way, right? Like, it's truly like if you want to add a new kind of GPU installation on prem in a new hospital system, it's not actually that expensive, but it doesn't happen by itself. Like that takes resources on its own. It means that we need to make sure that our programs, like when we think about like how do we fund these centers, well, how do we actually do outreach to them? Like try, because if we don't, then what's going to happen is that the places with the most resources are going to buy the Chinese tools. It will help them lower their costs. It'll help them deliver better care, but it could have helped anyone. It's not like a uh, when the intervention says like read me data, process me something. Compute is cheap, especially inference is cheap relative. It's not like
Hmm.
new cell therapy where like the fundamental cost is a bunch of like wet lab experiments, has a bunch of like expensive kind of chemistry behind it. Uh, so it could be delivered that far. I just think that it's going to require a big community push to make it so.
Now, final question, because I know you're super busy, but what are, let's say, your number one, two, and three top advancements that you see coming in medical AI in the next 5 or 10 years?
I think it's going to be I've threefold. One, the ability to jointly model essentially everything you might know about a patient to predict an outcome of interest. This is today intractable. Like you cannot model end to end like in a big transformer kind of way whole pathology and longitudinal imaging and the EMR at the same time. And so we're always kind of like picking and choosing and taking a fairly siloed approach. And it's intuitive that something can look at all of it, can learn more and give you better kind of understanding of those outcomes of interest. I think that is going to enable things that are currently intractable in terms of understanding different kinds of outcomes, is going to open up a lot of doors. That's like the first kind of buckets, like better predictive modeling. Second bucket I'll call generally better decision making, because it's one thing to have a prediction. Like who cares about a prediction? You need to like to do something, right? You need to basically do better decision making. And I think there's a lot of space for AI models to derive new kinds of clinical policies. Like when do you switch treatments? How do we, from all the data that we have, how do we make the optimal policy for treatment planning, screening planning, kind of other decision processes where we kind of more tightly where uh, it's not just AI gives you a here's a probability of X, Y, and Z. It helps you make a decision and makes new kinds of decision workflows possible. I think this kind of like decision theory side is going to be another massive boom. It's linked to this. It links to uncertainty quantification, to statistical guarantees, and there's a lot of kind of building up in that space. The last boom, I would say that it's going to help us rethink the way we do prospective trials and evidence generation. Evidence is incredibly important, right? And right now it's incredibly expensive. And I do not think that the world of like by the time we finish one large RCT in an AI model, the AI model is probably obsolete. So the kind of
Yep.
traditional, the traditional approach isn't quite there. And there's already a lot of great work from the college inference community showing that there's a better way, and I think that's only going to get more and more momentum, and it's going to dovetail really closely with kind of modern AI models that should be changing quite quickly. And how do you do trials in this kind of way, and how do you make trials cheaper as a whole, kind of integrating real evidence, all respect data from other tools that are not quite the same, and the thing you're trying today.
Such an exciting time. Great interview, Adam. I think that, one, kudos for all your hard work for you and your team and everything you guys are doing on the forefront of AI. It's such an exciting time. I think the biggest challenges that I'd take away from this interview that you're going to have is number one, the all the privacy issues and the ethical issues that plague us now, even without AI. I think that's a huge roadblock when it comes to advancements in medicine. I think that's gonna it's gonna slow down the integration of AI. Hopefully, not too much, because I feel like it's such a great technology that it's going to improve healthcare. But those are two roadblocks that are definitely going to slow down integration. And then disparities. I think making sure that AI is not just in the major academic centers, but also in the rural community hospitals is going to be a challenge uh, throughout our healthcare system. But such an exciting time. The technology is explosive. And I think you said it best. People who are scared of it, who view it as competition, who are reticent to adopt AI and new technology are just gonna become obsolete. So my advice would be that new technology, especially AI, is here to stay. It's always going to be here, and you have to embrace it and you have to incorporate it. I think that's the only way that I'm looking at it, and I know that my colleagues are doing the same.
Yeah, I would add that that a lot of tools simply haven't been as that useful yet, right? So it's not like I would not blame anyone to say like, well, why isn't AI necessary for primary care? Because how's useful primary care? Like we need to build the evidence, and right now, it remains incredibly expensive to prove that things truly work. Partially because technology needs to get better, so some things don't actually work that well. Partially because the way we run these studies in itself is very expensive, and I think like part of our kind of grand challenge across the next 5 years is building this kind of evidence generation machine. So as we have new kinds of technology making possible, so it become obvious and safe and provable to say, hey, use this. It's going to make care better in this way. And it's not like you have to invent everything yourself from scratch. It's going to require a lot of buy-in from all the communities it holds. And I think it's a matter of time. The true worst case is that care is exactly as it is today. You cannot have that.
I agree.
Has to get
If
better.
we're in the same situation in 5 or 10 years as we are now, then we failed
Yeah.
for sure. Adam, kudos, man. Awesome interview. Very exciting time. Thanks to you and all your colleagues for really pushing our field forward. Have a great weekend.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for having me.